of you. We were discussing about the classification. So in classification, we studied classification of all the plant kingdom. We started with the third chapter, if you remember. So this plant kingdom classification we have done. Under this, there are categories. We have to study about cryptogams and phanerogams. Cryptogams explains about non-flowering plants. Phanerogams explains about flowering plants. So under flowering cryptogams, we have to study about algae, fungi, bryophytes, pteridophytes. And coming to phanerogams, we have to study about gymnosperms and angiosperms. So we have to start with, so according to the classification, we need to discuss about algae. So when it comes to algae, so first group under cryptogams we are studying. Generally termed as algae. So how to define algae? We have seen, most of us, all of us, we have seen some greenish patch, floating patch on the water, stagnant water bodies, or even in some of the ponds, pools, ditches, we have seen green color patches which is freely floating on the water. So this we call it as, it is termed as, generally it is known as algae. And this cannot be placed under plant kingdom. It is isolated from the plant. It is not placed under bryophytes or pteridophytes because it is not having a differentiated body. Plant body is not differentiated into root, stem and leaves. So it is just appears as a dorsiventrally flattened structure. So just green patches which floats on the water. So this is called as algae. So there is no differentiation in the plant body. So hence it is called as thallus. And some of the general characters we are discussing about the general characters. General characters of algae we are mentioning. So all these are aquatic. These are aquatic. And here these are the primitive forms because when it comes to bryophyte, pteridophyte, so there we find the classification. We find terrestrial and well-developed organized body, plant body. But here these are primitive and most of these are aquatic. And under aquatic, either freshwater form, we find most of these either freshwater form or marine forms. So most of them, they are growing in either fresh water, ponds, pools, rivers. Marine represents the water which contains salt. Salt content is present, either sea or ocean. So algae is present even in the marine environment. And even some of these are terrestrial. Even we find terrestrial forms. Terrestrial represents algae which is growing on soil. But here it is growing on damp soil or the wet soil where there is more moisture content or water is present. On the damp surfaces, damp soil surfaces, we find the luxuriant growth of the algae. So it is even which grows on, it grows on damp soil surface. And here even we find algae which is growing on tree trunk. You might have seen in forest and all, dense or tropical rainforest or the evergreen forest, even algae growing on the tree trunks we might have seen. on the tree trunks, branches, rock surfaces. On the continuous where we find the damp moist surfaces, we find a dense pack. It appears just like a mass or a layer. So this grows on even on the other plant body, and even sometimes it lives association with other higher organisms. So we find even epiphytic, we call it as, it is termed as epiphytic. Epi refers to above. Epi above. Phyta refers to plants. Phyta refers to plants. Epi means above. So it always grows even on the plant bodies, on the tree trunks, branches, on or the wooden rocks, or in wooden logs or the rock surfaces we find. So they are called as epiphytic. Even it grows on the surface or tree trunks, and sometimes it is living associated with a higher organism. It is not affecting the higher organism. Mutually both gets benefited. Neither harmed, nothing is harmed. So both the organisms which lives together, both are getting benefited. Such relationship we call it as symbiotic. It is termed as mutualism. Both the organism lives together with a coordination and both mutually gets benefited. So even we find mutualism, symbiotic relationship with our other organisms. Even we find symbiotic relationship. This is associated with the higher organisms. Associated with the higher organisms. Sometimes even in algae we find parasitic forms. For example, in case of coffee and tea plants, on coffee and the tree plantation, tree leaves or the tree trunks, here we find some of the algae which is causing diseases. It is causing diseases. So even we find parasitic forms. So here even parasitic forms are also present. Parasitic forms are also existing. So we find different types, and here it is isolated from the fungi because of the main character. They can undergo photosynthesis. They can synthesize their own food. So in universe we can say, so these are the first group, they can produce their own food or energy at the trophic level. And these are the one which supplies energy for the next higher categories. So most of the animal kingdom are completely depending on algae. And this is the first group providing food for aquatic life. So it is called as primary producer. The first level you might have studied in the energy web or the energy level. So in this it is called as primary producers. So this is the first group. It acts as, when it comes to the next one, these are called as producers, or I'll mention these are called as autotrophs. These are referred as autotrophs. Auto refers to self. Trophic refers to energy. They can synthesize their own food. They can synthesize their own energy. It's called as autotroph. So here they can undergo, algae undergoes photosynthesis. Undergoes photosynthesis so that it can synthesize its own food. So right from the beginning, if you remember Kingdom Monera we started. In Kingdom Monera, all the primitive microorganisms, unicellular, we have studied bacteria, if you remember. Then virus, prions, viroids, all the simple unicellular organisms. Only in bacterial group we found photosynthetic. I mean, they can synthesize their own food, but The pigment is called as bacteriochlorophyll. But here, this is the first group. This is the first group when you are starting from the first. This is the first group. They are having photosynthetic pigment. Chlorophyll is present. So where we find chlorophyll? The first group. So here, algae undergoes photosynthesis by trapping solar energy. This is the first group of the organism utilizes light and undergoes photosynthesis by solar radiation or by solar energy. It can synthesize its own food. And this is the first group. Algae are called as chlorophyllous. So algae are termed as chlorophyllous. Chlorophyllous represents these contain chlorophyll pigment. The first group contains chlorophyll pigment, green pigment which traps solar energy, undergoes photosynthesis and produces its own glucose molecules. So this is the first group where we find chlorophyll. So chlorophyll is present. Chlorophyll are present. Chlorophyll are present and which takes part in. So these are the one which takes part in photosynthesis. It takes part in photosynthesis. And here, when we mention this, so these pigments, we call it as chlorophyll pigments. There are different types of the chlorophyll pigments are present. When you take algae, once again it is divided into further subclasses. Chlorophyll A, B, C, D, E. Like this, different types of the chlorophyll pigments are present. So algae contains different chlorophyll pigments. Different chlorophyll pigments are present. Different chlorophyll pigments are present. And these chlorophyll pigments can be mentioned like this. The pigments or photosynthetic pigments we can say. So here I'll mention the one which takes part in photosynthesis. So I call it as not only chlorophyll. Along with the chlorophyll, many other photosynthetic pigments are also present here. So along with that, different photosynthetic pigments. Different photosynthetic pigments are present. That means, so these photosynthetic pigments are, first one is chlorophyll. This is the main which takes part. So usually we find here A, B, C and D in algae. Along with that, it also contains several other photosynthetic pigments. It also contains carotene. It contains xanthophyll, fucoxanthin. Many of the pigments are present. Collectively we mention as photosynthetic pigments. And next comes the blue-green algae, how we studied in case of cyanobacteria, just like that. There we mentioned phycocyanin, if you remember. Similar way, here also we find phycoerythrin. It also contains phycoerythrin, fucoxanthin. So I'll mention. It also contains fucoxanthin, and it contains phycoerythrin. So many of these takes part in photosynthesis. Phycoerythrin. So many of the photosynthetic pigments are present. Next comes, apart from this, these are called as either here in the first group we have studied, in kingdom Monera we have studied some of the microscopic organisms. Here it is multicellular organisms. But there are some unicellular algae are also present. Even though it is multicellular, but it is sometimes multicellular and microscopic forms are also present. Microscopic, multicellular. And some algae are present, it grows up to nearly 40 to 50 meters in length. Sometimes it disturbs navigation, transportation. So luxuriantly it grows and it grows to several meters, we can mention. So these are, for example, so algae grows to, coming to the structural organization, and these algae are usually multicellular. Some unicellular forms are also present. Some of the unicellular forms are also present like chlorella. Like chlorella, it is an unicellular form. It is a unicellular form, single cell it contains. And in some cases we find even multicellular algae made up of many cells. So now it is advanced character compared to kingdom Monera, it is an advanced character. So body is made up of many cells but still small, microscopic. So it is multicellular and microscopic. Multicellular and microscopic. Not all. Some of the algae grows to several centimeters. Some of the algae reaches several meters in length. Example, so here some algae which acetabularia for example. So these grows to several centimeters and some exceptional cases 40 to 60 meters in length. Meters in length. So when it comes to exceptional cases, macrocystis, remember this terminologies? In macrocystis. So it is a marine algae, it grows to 60 meters in length. So in microscopic too, we find macroscopic forms. And these algae are called as photosynthetic pigments. It contains, I said. These are called as avascular. Vascular tissues are absent. Xylem and phloem, conducting tissues are absent. And even though conducting tissues are absent, it does not disturb the growth of the algae because algae is completely aquatic, lives in water. So even in gigantic forms, even it grows to several meters. Transportation, conduction of water is not at all a problem in algae because each cell comes in contact with water. So hence conduction of water or the minerals is not a problem here even though vascular tissues are absent. Like xylem and phloem, they are called as vascular tissues. Remember? So this xylem and phloem is called as vascular tissues and these are called as avascular. It is termed as avascular. So that algae are vascular plants. So vascular tissues are absent, I'll mention. Vascular tissues are absent. Vascular tissues are absent. So what are vascular tissues? Vascular tissues are xylem and phloem. Remember, xylem and phloem are called as vascular tissues and these are absent, but still it is not a problem because algae are completely immersed in water and even though it is absent, conduction of or we can say transportation of the material. So here transportation it is not possible because it is always immersed, directly comes in contact with water. So whenever a cell requires water, directly it can absorb. So transportation is not a problem It is not a problem in algae because comes in contact with water, because immediate surrounding is water. It lives in water. So hence transportation is not at all a problem. And algae is not provided with any supporting tissue. Mechanical tissues are absent. There are no supporting tissues. But still, algae completely on free floating surfaces, we can see the expanded spread sheet of the algae. So here it is supported by only buoyancy. Some of the air-filled vacuoles are present which are filled with air. Just like while swimming, how we use balloons or it is air-filled structures what we use. Similar way, algae cells are provided with air-filled vacuoles. So these provides buoyancy, helps in floating. So even this buoyancy is the one helps to maintain the structure of the algae. Even in case of marine forms which lives in sea or the ocean, even in case of highest sea tides also, it never damages the algae. So this buoyancy helps them getting injured. So now algae is not supported by mechanical tissues. Mechanical tissues are absent. But it is supported by buoyancy. Remember the word. So it is buoyancy provides the stiffness. Buoyancy provides support and helps to maintain the structure, even in sea tides, and protects algae being injured. Tides from even in sea tides being injured. Even in sea tides, it protects them. And here, plant body is not differentiated into, there is no specific parts called root, stem and leaves. It appears like just flattened structure. Even dorsal surface and ventral surface, it appears like dorsi-ventrally just flattened structure. Here it is termed as thallus. So here plant body is termed as thallus. Remember the word. It is termed as thallus. So sometimes the same terminology we are using even in fungi. Thallus we call it as. Both are some similarities it exhibit. Algae and fungi exhibit certain similarities. So here it is termed as thallus because the plant body is, I'll mention here why it is called as thallus. Because dorsi-ventrally flattened structure. It is dorsi-ventrally flattened structure. That is why it is termed as thallus, thalli. And there are no differentiated root, stem and leaves. But in some higher advanced algae, we find similar structure. But here it is called as hold fast. So I'll mention here, in some algae, we find the structures like this. So in some of the algae, we find the structure It appears as root-like structure. We cannot call it as a root. It helps to hold the substratum, supporting structure. It helps to hold the substratum. It is called as, that is why it is termed as hold fast. It is called as hold fast. And stalk-like structure. It is called as stipe. And it contains leaf-like structure. It is not exactly leaf. Leaf-like structure looks like. And it is called as lamina. It is called as lamina. And what I have written this algae, it is an example for algae. And the example what I have written, name of the algae is laminaria. So it is an example, remember the word, it is called as laminaria, it is termed as. So in laminaria, we find certain structures. Now, another character I am writing. So plant body is not differentiated. Plant body is not differentiated. It is not differentiated into root, stem and leaves. Like higher organisms, higher plants, we don't find these structure, but structures are similar to root we find here. It is called as hold fast. So root-like structure, leaf-like structure, because anatomically it is differing higher organisms. So anatomy is not matching. Internal arrangement of the cells and the tissues entirely differs from the arrangement of higher plants. So here it is termed as hold fast. Hold fast, root-like structure, and the function is it helps in anchoring. It helps in, it is fixation. It is called as anchoring, fixation, anchoring to substratum. Anchoring to substratum. Hold fast, similar to roots. And second root is called as stipe. Stipe. It is stalk-like structure. It is stalk-like structure. We can compare to stalk of the higher plant. Next one, leaf-like structure. It is called as lamina. It is called as lamina. So this is another part. It is appearing like leaf-like, but the entire algae is photosynthetic. But the entire algae is photosynthetic. Remember? So lamina is called as leaf-like structure. Leaf-like structure. It is called as lamina. It is termed as. And algae is, as we mentioned, vascular tissues are absent, and this undergoes. It exhibits certain pigments and reserve food material is present. Similar to plants, it exhibits cell wall. Plant, each cell is made up of cell wall. Cell wall is made up of cellulose, similar characters of plants. So here we find photosynthetic, green in color due to the presence of chlorophyll, and cell wall is made up of cellulose. And here the common characters we are mentioning here, cell wall is present. Cell wall is present and made up of, because if you remember in kingdom Monera, we have mentioned in bacteria cell wall, but bacterial cell wall was made up of peptidoglycans. That was a identifying feature of bacteria. Whereas in case of plants, cell wall is present. The main difference is here no peptidoglycans in plant cell. It is made up of cell wall. It is similar to plant. It is made up of cell wall. And this cell wall is made up of, it is cellulose. It is made up of cellulose. And reserve food material. In bacteria, primitive form we have studied volatilin granules. Some of the lipid globules were present. As similar to plants, we don't find any oil globules or the lipid globules are absent here. Some species exhibit volatilin granules here. Chlamydomonas, for example, they exhibit volatilin granules. So other than this, we find in case of cellulose form, here we find either reserve food material as direct glucose or it is stored in the form of starch. So glycogen is a characteristic in case of animals or fungi we find, whereas here glucose is converted into starch and stored. So here starch is the reserve food material. Starch is the reserve food material. Starch is the reserve food material here. And now, when it comes to reproduction, all the basic character we are mentioning, when it comes to reproduction, algae are able to undergo vegetative, asexual and sexual, all the three types of reproduction. So algae undergoes vegetative reproduction. It undergoes vegetative reproduction. A common type of vegetative reproduction is fragmentation. Here we find unicellular, multicellular. I would like to mention here, even in these, in this character, some of the different organization we find, cellular organization. In structural organization, we find colonial forms. We find colonial forms. Colonial forms. That means group of cells lives together and it forms colony. It is called as colony. So group of cells lives together. Either flagellated colonies, if they are provided with flagella, or it is made up of group of cells and these group of cells are not provided with flagella, non-flagellated colonies. So colonial forms, it is group of cells, it is collection of cells. And these collection of cells either motile or it is non-motile. Either motile or non-motile. Motile colonies, non-motile colonies. Group of cells provided with flagella called as colonial forms, flagellated. Non-motile group of cells without flagella, these are non-motile colonies. And some of the species we find there is formation of filaments. Formation of filaments. For example, some of the species, one above the other, cells are arranged. One above the cells. Cells are arranged one above the other like a row. So here we find there is formation of, it is not DNA strand, it is chloroplast, it is coiled. It is chloroplast, it is coiled in Spirogyra. In Spirogyra, spiral arrangement of chloroplast. So what I have mentioned, it is chloroplast. It is chloroplast. Chloroplast is spirally coiled and the cells, many of the cells are placed one above the other. And it forms a row of cell. It is called as filament. So it also exhibits filamentous form. It forms filamentous form. In filamentous form, it is uniseriate arrangement of the cells. Either one row of the cell unbranched, or sometimes we find branched. Even we find branched cells. So this gives rise to branches. Even we find branched cells. So this is called as filamentous. Row of cells are placed one above the other, but the filament is branched. Lateral branches arises. So this is in case of cladophora. This is in case of cladophora, what we are studying. Here what I have written example, it is Spirogyra. It is Spirogyra, its name. Name you remember, these are very important. So in algae we find even filamentous form. In filamentous form, once again, branched filamentous, unbranched filamentous, unbranched filamentous. We find different varieties of organization, cellular organization we find. So now, when it comes to vegetative reproduction, these uniseriate filaments breaks accidentally and it divides into smaller branches. They are called as fragments. And these fragments undergoes vegetative reproduction. This vegetative reproduction by means of fragmentation. By means of fragmentation. Fragmentation, the row of cells. This row of cells accidentally, when it breaks into small pieces, and these pieces are called as fragments. These small pieces of cells, a small row of the cell, it is called as fragment. But the algae never dies. This continues and grows as independent organism. So this continues and it grows as independent organism. It grows as independent organism. So this method is called as fragmentation, it is termed as. And algae is surrounded by, it is also surrounded by the outermost layer we can mention. So here, mucilage sheath. Mucilage sheath or covering is present. Covering. This protects algae. So around this, around normal cell wall, around this there is thin mucilaginous sheath is also present. It protects the algae from decay because continuously algae is present in the water, so it can decay or disintegrate. So it prevents algae from disintegration and even by means of desiccation getting dried. And epiphytic growth. When algae is floating, some other organism should not multiply on algae. So it prevents any other growth of other organism. So it always gives complete protection to the algae. It is called as mucilaginous sheath. Protect the algae by getting wet continuously. It protects algae from, it is decaying, it is protect algae from desiccation and even epiphytic growth. Other organisms should not multiply on algae. So it prevents it is epiphytic growth. It also protects algae from epiphytic growth. Next comes, when it comes to vegetative reproduction, it is by means of, usually by means of fragmentation. Next one, coming to algae, it undergoes even asexual reproduction. It undergoes asexual reproduction by means of two types of the spores it produces. Asexual reproduction. Either it is mitospores or it is meiospores, it is termed as. So undergoes asexual reproduction and produces two types of the spores. Produces, first group is called as mitospores and the second is called as meiospores. And as name indicates, so spores are produced by mitosis. They are called as mitospore. Spores produced by meiosis are called as meiospores. So mitospores are produced by, these are produced by mitosis, resultant product of mitosis, and meiospores are produced by meiosis. Produced by meiosis. So when there is meiosis, spores resultant products, spores are haploid. When there is mitosis, there is no reduction in the chromosomal number. It remains same as that of the sporophyte. And when it undergoes mitosis, mitospore or meiospore, the resultant products, it can be flagellated or it is non-flagellated spores. So the resultant products could be either flagellated spore or without locomotory structures, they are called as non-flagellated. It produces, this give rise to either flagellated spores provided with locomotory structures or non-flagellated spores. So without flagella, so these are non-motile structures, just similar to spores it arises. And coming to the third, so it is second type, what I have mentioned. Coming to the third type, just like compared to kingdom Monera, it is an advanced structure, what we are studying now. So algae are able to undergo sexual reproduction. It also exhibit sexual reproduction, and sexual reproduction takes place by three types. Sexual reproduction takes place by three types. First one, it is called as isogamous. It is isogamous type of sexual reproduction. Iso refers to same, similar or same. So that in case of isogamous, it is fusion of gametes which are exactly similar in sizes. Both are exactly similar, either flagellated similar or non-flagellated similar structures. So it is fusion of the gametes. Both are, we call it as isogamous. So it is fusion of male and female gamete takes place. Both the gametes are exactly similar in size. Fusion of the gametes which are similar in size, exactly similar in size. And once again under this there are two types. One is flagellated and the second one is non-flagellated. So here under this fusion of gametes, I'll mention it is fusion of flagellated, either it is flagellated gametes or it is fusion of non-flagellated gametes. So this we call it as isogamous. And this is quite common in case of the primitive algae. For example, in chlorophyceae, example for this, Spirogyra, chlamydomonas. So these are some examples for isogamous fusion. Next one, when it comes to the second one, under sexual reproduction, I'm mentioning the second one now. So under this, I'm writing the second type of sexual reproduction. Under sexual reproduction, second type. It is called as anisogamous. It is called as anisogamous. So now it is fusion of gametes, but they are dissimilar in size, not similar. So one is larger in size, one of the gamete is smaller in size. Fusion of gametes which are not similar in sizes. It is called as anisogamous. So this represents fusion of dissimilar gametes. Fusion of dissimilar gametes. Dissimilar gametes. And here one of the gamete is larger in size, the other gamete is smaller in size, male or it could be female. So it depends, it varies species to species. So it is fusion of dissimilar gametes. So under this, once again, either flagellated or it is non-flagellated. Either flagellated or non-flagellated. And example for this, Eudorhina species. Under sexual reproduction, we'll move on to the third one. It is called as oogamous type. So third is called as oogamous. It is called as oogamous type. So under oogamous type, both are exactly different. Female gamete is larger in size and it is non-motile without provided with flagella. It is called as oosphere or egg. Male gamete is smaller in size and it is motile. It can be termed as anthrozoids. So here exactly it is fusion of female gamete. First one I am writing. It is fusion of female gamete which is non-motile, which is larger in size, I'm mentioning about female gamete here. And it is non-motile. And it is termed as, sometimes it is also termed as oosphere. And in some species we call it as egg. It is called as egg or oosphere. Next one, this fuses with a smaller sized male gamete. It is a fusion of, it is oosphere. Egg is larger in size and this fuses with the gametes which are smaller in size. So these are egg, male gamete, and it is representing, this is male gamete, and the larger sized one, this is female gamete or the egg or oosphere. And fusion of male gamete and female gamete. Now I am writing about male gamete. So compared to female gamete is smaller in size, provided with flagella, they are motile and active structures. So it is completely different gametes, different type of the gametes are fused. It is called as oogamous. So these male gametes are motile, active, and these are provided with flagella and smaller in size. So this type is called as oogamous type. So oogamous is common in case of volvox, Eulothrix. It is quite common. So example for this is volvox. Example for this is volvox. Remember some examples, it's very important. So now what we discussed is all the general characters of algae. So under this, these are classified into different classes. These are different classified into different classes. So there are three classes we have to study under algae: chlorophyceae, phaeophyceae, and rhodophyceae. Chlorophyceae are commonly called as green algae. Phaeophyceae is called as brown algae. Rhodophyceae is termed as it is red algae. So all the three are classified, comes under algae. It is called as three classes, we can call it as. So now algae are divided into algae, all the members. All the members. So all the members of algae are divided into three classes. Members of algae, members represents all the species belongs to this. Members of algae are divided into three classes. Divided into three classes. So these three classes are called as, it is chlorophyceae, second one, it is called as phaeophyceae, and the third one is rhodophyceae. So there are three classes commonly called as green algae, brown algae, red algae. Common names. Chlorophyceae is termed as green algae. Phaeophyceae is termed as brown algae. Rhodophyceae is known as red algae. So all these three classes with their characters and examples we need to discuss. And these three classes are classified based on certain factors: nature of the cell wall, pigments present, reserve food material, number of flagella, and habitat. At the end of the chapter, after completion of this, we need to make a chart. So mentioning all the differentiation, comparison of all the three algae. When you make a chart, you can understand what are the major differences. And even algae exhibit certain similarities when you compare to fungi. Because most of these grows on damp surfaces. Water is required. And the outermost layer is called as cell wall. And both exhibit either unicellular, multicellular structure, reproduces by means of spores. Some similarities it exhibits. So here also, when algae is classified into further, it is based on certain characters. When we make a chart, clearly we can identify and distinguish based on what it is classified. And now we'll continue. So till here, this I'll stop. I'll continue in the next class. Thank you all. 5 minutes or 2 minutes I'll take. We can continue. Huh?